Before we begin, remember to subscribe if you follow real criminal investigations and want updates on cases that shake entire communities. The first reports reached local Michigan authorities on November 3rd, a missing persons call involving 22-year-old Rebecca Park, who was 38 weeks pregnant and expected to give birth within days. She had vanished without explanation. No signs of a struggle, no witnesses, just a sudden, alarming silence. For investigators, the timing was immediately concerning. The late stages of pregnancy are a period when most missing persons cases become urgent, sometimes life or death within hours. Police began an immediate search, checking last known locations and talking to everyone close to her. But nothing about Rebecca's disappearance made sense. Family interviews revealed contradictions. Alibis were incomplete, and behind the calm faces answering questions, detectives sensed tension. Something unspoken, something wrong. Days passed. Search teams combed rural roads, wooded areas, and nearby towns. Volunteers joined the effort. Flyers went up across Wexford County. Every passing hour intensified the alarm. Rebecca still wasn't found, and there was no trace of the baby she was about to deliver. On November 25th, everything changed. A body was discovered inside the Manistee National Forest, deep in a remote area rarely traveled except for hunters and hikers. When investigators arrived, they knew instantly that this scene would become the center of a major criminal case. The remains matched the description of Rebecca Park. Authorities later confirmed that she was no longer pregnant at the time of her death, a discovery that expanded the investigation from a missing persons case to a potential double tragedy. Her unborn child was nowhere to be found. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Police, who had been working tirelessly, now faced a more disturbing question. What exactly happened to Rebecca? And where was her baby? As forensic teams processed the remote forest location, detectives turned their attention back to those closest to Rebecca. In the days following the discovery, interviews intensified. Digital devices were seized. Timelines were reconstructed. And then, on December 2nd, the case took a dramatic turn. Rebecca's biological mother, Courtney Bartholomew, 40, and stepfather, Bradley Bartholomew, 47, were taken into custody. Prosecutors announced a staggering list of charges: first-degree premeditated murder, felony murder, torture, conspiracy to commit torture, unlawful imprisonment, assault on a pregnant individual with intent to cause miscarriage or stillbirth, and removal of a dead body. The courtroom filled with supporters holding signs demanding justice as the charges were read. Bond was denied for both defendants. But the investigation didn't stop there. Two additional family members, Rebecca's younger sister and her sister's fiancé, were also arrested on unrelated and lesser charges, including evidence tampering and filing a false police report. Neither of them was charged with harming Rebecca. Despite the arrests, one critical question still haunted investigators: where is the baby? The discovery of Rebecca Park's body had shaken investigators, but the unanswered question about her missing unborn child pushed the case into a new level of urgency. Detectives knew they were no longer dealing with a simple homicide investigation. This had become a race against time, a frantic effort to uncover what happened in the final hours of Rebecca's life and where her baby might be. Authorities retraced every step of Rebecca's movements leading up to her disappearance. They pulled surveillance footage from gas stations, stores, and rural road cameras. They followed phone data, reconstructed timelines, and examined vehicle records. Each digital breadcrumb brought them closer to understanding the events surrounding her death, but the picture they were assembling was darker than anyone anticipated. During the early stages of the investigation, inconsistencies appeared in statements given by certain family members. Those inconsistencies grew sharper after the autopsy confirmed Rebecca was no longer pregnant when found. Detectives recognized this wasn't simply a case of misremembered timelines. There were indicators of withheld information and possibly intentional deception. When authorities executed search warrants on homes, devices, and vehicles, new information emerged. The prosecution later laid out what investigators believed: that Rebecca had been forcibly removed from a residence, held against her will, and assaulted. These claims became the foundation for the severe charges that prosecutors filed against her mother, Courtney Bartholomew, and stepfather, Bradley Bartholomew. But the public wouldn't learn the full scope of those accusations until the December 2nd arraignment. The courtroom atmosphere was tense, packed with residents, supporters holding handwritten signs, and reporters trying to understand how a case so disturbing could unfold inside a family. Prosecutors presented details based on their investigation: allegations of torture, unlawful imprisonment, and acts intended to cause the loss of the pregnancy. The charges were read one by one: first-degree murder, felony murder, torture, conspiracy to commit torture, assault on a pregnant individual with intent to cause miscarriage or stillbirth, and removal of a dead body.
As the charges were presented, the defendant showed little visible emotion, but the gallery behind them reacted with gasps, tears, and disbelief. Some of the search volunteers who had spent days combing forests and fields for Rebecca sat clutching one another, shaken by what they were hearing. Then came the second announcement: 2 additional arrests connected not to Rebecca's death, but to the aftermath. Investigators had charged Rebecca's younger sister with tampering with evidence and filing a false police report, alleging she provided misleading information during the search. Her fiancé was charged with unrelated drug offenses discovered during the investigation. Prosecutors emphasized that neither of them was accused of harming Rebecca, but that their actions interfered with the case. Still, even with multiple arrests and a detailed list of charges, one devastating gap remained: the whereabouts of Rebecca's baby. Investigators continued the search across state lines, bringing in specialized teams and reviewing hours of rural surveillance footage. The possibility that the child could be alive pushed the authorities to work around the clock. Behind the scenes, tensions within the investigative team grew. Some believed the missing child held the key to understanding the entire case. Others feared the worst. But late in the investigation, detectives uncovered one crucial piece of evidence, something that forced the case in an entirely new direction. And it would become the most disturbing revelation yet. By the time investigators reached the final stretch of their search, the case had expanded far beyond anything they initially imagined. What began as a missing persons report had evolved into one of the most disturbing criminal investigations the region had seen in years. And yet, despite the arrests, the charges, and the flood of evidence, one haunting question remained unanswered: what happened to Rebecca Park's unborn child? Authorities continued to push forward. Search teams moved methodically through the dense areas of the Manistee National Forest, scouring rivers, ravines, and abandoned structures. Detectives worked through the night reviewing digital records and re-interviewing witnesses. Information from the autopsy only intensified the urgency. Rebecca had reached 38 weeks of pregnancy, a fully developed infant, an entirely separate life unaccounted for. While investigators avoided public speculation, it was clear that behind closed doors, the pressure was immense. Every new tip was pursued, every fragment of evidence analyzed. And then, deep in the investigation, detectives uncovered what would become one of the most significant developments in the case: communications and timelines that prosecutors later said supported their belief that the assault on Rebecca was intentional and premeditated. This evidence formed the backbone of the charges already filed, particularly the allegations of torture, unlawful imprisonment, and intent to cause the loss of pregnancy. Prosecutors presented these findings during the preliminary proceedings, arguing that the actions taken against Rebecca were deliberate, coordinated, and planned. But even with these revelations, the case was far from over. Investigators were still missing a vital piece of the puzzle. Without locating the child, the timeline of Rebecca's final hours and the true extent of what occurred remained incomplete. Community shock grew deeper. Candlelight vigils were held throughout Wexford County. Volunteers pinned blue and pink ribbons to trees and signposts, symbols of both grieving and hope. Residents who had once searched for Rebecca were now searching for answers, desperate to understand how such a tragedy could happen inside a family. Inside the courthouse, tension mounted as prosecutors prepared for the next phases of legal proceedings. The defendants remained held without bond. Journalists filled the seats at every hearing, documenting each development. The courtroom became a place where grief, anger, and disbelief collided. Authorities continued to reiterate that this was an ongoing investigation. They urged anyone with information to come forward. And as more evidence surfaced, investigators expanded their search zones and broadened their interviews. The case was evolving, growing more complex, more painful, and more urgent. Then, in the final stages of the chapter, prosecutors delivered the statement that captured the gravity of the entire situation. The infant's whereabouts were still unknown, and determining what happened to the child remained a top priority for law enforcement. It was the single unresolved thread holding the entire case in a state of suspended heartbreak. Because until that answer was found, until the final piece of the story surfaced, the investigation would remain open, active, and deeply unsettled. And as the chapter closes, viewers are left with the harsh, lingering truth. Sometimes, the most devastating cases aren't defined by what investigators uncover, but by what they still can't find. If you want updates as this case develops, make sure to subscribe. The story isn't over yet. New information could break at any moment.